Okay, we're ready. Okay, hold on one second. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So we're starting a 14 lesson session on healthy relationships. Is focused on couples. And some of the things that we're going to be covering have to do with some skills that are necessary in order to have a healthy marriage. And it can be something that's learned prior to marriage or something that's learned to revive your marriage. So we just want to, we were supposed to start at 7:30, which is a few minutes. So just need a couple minutes or so to get ready and let people come in, because this class mostly is being live streamed. It wasn't expected for it to be in person. So let's begin, inshallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. If people have questions, they can send them by way of Facebook or YouTube. I'm mostly going to be responding to what's coming through Facebook, just because of the reach is more than what is on YouTube right now. So firstly, we want to begin with talking about the relationship in Islam, right, before we get into some points of psychology and so on and so forth. And we wanted to focus a little on the 21st ayat of Surah Al-Rum. And it's an important ayat because here, the context of the ayat, first of all, is talking about what we mean by the context is that we have an ayat. And so then that ayat comes within a relationship to other ayats, the ayat that comes before and the ayat that comes after. So when we look at the context for this ayat from Surah Al-Rum, we find that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is discussing life and death, and how it is that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is able to bring life from death and bring death into life. In other words, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has that power over the human being and all of the creation overall, right? So here the ayah says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. Let's start with that point. That from the signs of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, or that He created for us our partner. And that partner here is very defined. So the reason why we're bringing this up is because the relationship in Islam has a specific definition, because we live in a society where the concept of family has multiple definitions. People are free to think how they want to think, but that doesn't mean that the Muslim loses his and her identity and understanding how it is that revelation defines certain things for us. We can't force la ikraha fi din. We can't force people to believe like we believe and practice like we practice. And that's the nature of this existence that we're in, that everyone is tested. And so as believers, though, we have to have an orientation. As believers, we have to be clear that everybody in the dunya, everybody that lives in this existence with us, is not going to follow the same thing that we follow. But that doesn't open the door for us to be confused. So the Quran gives us a certain set of directives and gives us a certain understanding of what a relationship is. And in this case, in this 14 part session on healthy relationships, we're talking about the relationship in a very defined way. We're talking about the relationship between the male and the female. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, from the signs that He puts before us, or that He created the human being, and in addition to that, more specifically, that He created pairs from ourselves. So it means that we're compatible with each other. And then here we have what we call ta'leel, litaskunu ilayha, right? And so in this case, there is a point that is being mentioned as to why and what is the purpose of that relationship. What is the purpose of the relationship between the male and the female in the context here? Now we talk about the natural context, right? The biological context, the context of two human beings coming together within a set relationship that we call a nikah, right? Or that we call marriage. To come together, here Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is talking about that, that we have a sense of peace with each other, right? That we have a sense of rest in each other. Husband and wife, in that dynamic, in that relationship dynamic, is supposed to be a relationship in which we're inclining towards each other. So that marital contract, what it does, because remember that in Islam, the relationship between the male and the female is not automatically allowable unless it's family. Yes, you understand what I'm saying? We're talking about the coming together and the mixing of males and females. There's barriers and boundaries to that. We have to have a way that we're conducting ourselves with each other respectfully outside of the context of marriage. So the dynamic that we call male-female dynamic, that's prohibited. We have to take permission from the Sharia itself, from the Quran and the Sunnah, and we take that permission, right, to let down our guard by way of marriage. And so in that marriage, once that marriage takes place, that is a relationship in which we're supposed to be inclining towards each other, right? We're supposed to be inclining for each other. And so here then comes another feature of the relationship, which is ja'ala bainakum mawadda wa rahmah. That Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala puts between us love and mercy. And so these dynamics of that husband and wife, they become attracted to each other, right? Husband and wife, are supposed to be there as a protection for each other. Protection from what angle? From the angle of going against the command of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala when it comes, and let's be very open here, when it comes to the issue of the sexual desire, when it comes to the issue of the exchange of emotions. You understand what I'm saying? All of that is done in the context of a commitment. And so when we understand relationships, we have to be very clear on what it is that we're talking about Islamically. We're not just talking about two people making a business contract between each other, and that's it. We're talking about people entering into a relationship with each other, right? That allows them to get to know one another, that allows them to bond with each other, that allows them to share emotions, intimacy, and so on and so forth. And so then, as a consequence of that coming together, Here the Quran is telling us that love and mercy comes from Allah wa ta'ala. All of this is in the context of life itself, because this is the relationship in which life is brought right into existence. The husband-wife dynamic is not just a dynamic that's between them in general, right? Because we know not everyone can have children, but it is the means by which humanity continues to what? Reproduce itself with continuity. The institution of marriage, yani muassasat al-usra, is considered to be one of the oldest institutions for humanity, period. And probably we can say alongside of that is we see that the prophets, they build institutions for the worship of Allah Ta'ala. So alongside of Tawheed, we have the family bond and the family relationship. So this institution, the institution of the family, the foundation for it is continuity, meaning that it continues. It's not that we go into these marriages, we have no commitment to it, we don't know what to do, and we just divorce. Although divorce is allowable in Islam, but that's not the first preference of what it is that how it is that we understand marriage. That marriage is two people come together, and they spend some time with each other, and then they go their way. We don't have that concept. The concept of the mut'a marriage or the temporary marriage is not how we look at marriage, period. And matter of fact, that's a prohibited contract. That doesn't mean that there's no such a thing as divorce in Islam. But the idea is that we go into the relationship understanding what's the goal of the relationship and looking to bring about continuity, looking to bring about stability. الديمومة والاستقرار. هذا هو الأصل يعني في الزواج. الديمومة والاستقرار. It's a continuity and stability. That won't be achieved if we don't know how to have healthy relationships. It's not enough that we just come to a relationship and we say, I'm here, I have the money ready, and this, that. That's a very low level of understanding the relationship. Food, clothing, shelter. And that's, if we have that, and everybody has that at different degrees. Some people have very nice clothing. Some people have very nice shelter. Some people have very nice food. And other people have basics. But if we're thinking that the relationship is only based solely on that, then we're mistaken. Then we don't understand the reality of marriage itself. Because those things are very basic things just to sustain life, but to sustain the relationship, not only do you need those things, but you need to know how to treat each other. And here, that's why we're saying, that, and among his signs, the signs of Allah wa ta'ala, is this, that Allah created for you wives from among yourselves, meaning that there's compatibility, that you may find rest, repose in them, right? There's a sort of shelter that comes in them, and then you incline, your heart inclines, right? And he has put between you affection, love, mercy, right? And that's an important concept. And so Allah wa ta'ala says, Inna fi dhalika la ayati liqawmin yatafakkarun. That's an important point. That here Allah wa ta'ala is saying that in reflecting, because my vision is a little off. In reflecting upon the relationship of the male and the female are signs for those who are applying the intellect and they reflect. So life itself, the idea of life and death, is the context of this ayah. And Allah wa ta'ala is amazing how Allah wa ta'ala talks about life and death in the context of this ayah, and then talks about the relationship of the male and the female, and then implied in that is the understanding that bonding that takes place between the male and the female, where there's supposed to be love and mercy and a feeling of being safe, that children grow up in this environment, and then that is the environment that in which life is born and cultivated by the will of Allah wa ta'ala, and the human race continues to exist. The human race continues to exist. So life is within that context, right? The life of children being born is within the context of the marital structure, okay? And so there's a lot of things to be said on that regard, but I just wanted to make sure that we are beginning to define what is the family for us as Muslims? All due respect to everybody on the face of the earth, but we have our own positions on this stuff. And so what comes back to play is what? What comes back to play is that there's objectives, there's values, right? There's a certain identity that the Muslim marriage has. And that we have to save that for a series of other discussions. Today we wanted to begin with this, the issue. The first lesson is talking about effective communication. Talking about effective communication, right? So something that is very important to understand, though, before going into that issue, is that overall Islam is looking to what? To build the human being that is righteous. Maqasid الرسالة, or from the objectives of prophethood itself. يعني بناء الإنسان الصالح وبناء الأسرة الصالحة وبناء المجتمع الصالح. And the same thing with the ummah, and the same thing with the political order, and also to encourage يعني الخير الإنسانية or خير الإنسانية. So it's building the individual that is sound, healthy, on spiritual level, on the intellectual level, the physical level, and the family, and the society, and the ummah, and the nation overall itself, right? Because we know that as Muslims we exist with others, and also to be focused on what? To be focused on bringing goodness to humanity. So those are some of the objectives when we start talking about understanding Islam and what is Islam calling to. Those are the things that Islam is calling us to engage in, right? To learn how to be righteous and so on and so forth. Why is that important? Because the relationship in Islam is not just husband and wife. The relationship is not just me by myself and what I want and what I desire. The relationship, the concept of usra, really means that the individual is tied to a series of relationships. You have your grandparents, you have your aunts, you have your uncles, you have your cousins, you have your siblings, you have those families that come out of those relationships, and then you have other families that you live with and you grew up with. See, why is that important? Because in this society that we live in the West, individualism at this stage, in the past it was a little different because, like for instance, to be simple about it, Christianity existed with more dominance in this society. So even though it was an individualistic society, there was the concept, love your neighbor, or love for others, or love for your brother what you love for yourself. But that has kind of deteriorated with the deterioration of religion. And so more and more individualism is what dominates. Selfishness is what dominates. So then that means now that the concept of family is not the idea of us. The concept of family is me and you. See what I'm saying? Me and you and our children. And usually what the idea of children looks like is about 2 children. Another concept of family that has emerged in this society is not male female, it's male male, female female, like that. That's why we said that our idea as Muslims, we have a definition of what family is. It's the relationship between the male and the female, and out of that relationship also comes children in that relationship. It's not just that sex is only for me expressing affection, but sex also is in the context of what? The continuity of life itself. Giving birth to children and raising those children in the context of the family, in the context of the values of Islam, so that what? We raise up the idea of the Muslim and the Muslimah. And so in majority of the world, the idea of family includes the grandparents. It includes the mother and the fathers, or the mothers and fathers. It includes siblings. It includes nephews and nieces, aunts and uncles. Majority of the world. This definition of the family of just being 2 individuals, 2 adults and 2 children, and even the definition of the family being 2 people of the same sex, so to speak, these are new definitions for the family. The importance here is to understand that what? That because of individualism, Now we have an idea of ourselves as being in competition with each other. You get what I'm saying? In competition with each other. Individualism is about me. So when you have the idea of family and you have the idea of individualism, if you can't get over the idea of individualism, what happens is يعني هذه العلاقة هي علاقة الصراع, right? أصابت بالصراع يعني الفردي. So it becomes a relationship in which everyone is contesting for their rights and for themselves, and it becomes oppositional, and it's a relationship of clashes. That's not the idea of family that we have. We don't believe that males and females are incompatible. We don't believe that everything is just war between males and females, but we do believe that we have to learn how to deal with each other. And that's what brings us into this point, that for us to be able to be effective in our relationship with one another within the context of marriage, or for us to prepare for marriage, that we have to learn the value of listening. And it's not just any type of listening, right? Because how can we bond with each other? How can there be love and so on and so forth that's generated if we're not even listening to each other? We're not even connecting with each other. That's not even the idea of Muslim marriage. It's not the idea of Christian marriage. It's not the idea of marriage within Judaism or Buddhism or any religion on the face of the earth. And it's not the idea of marriage overall for humanity. There's some sort of respect and regard that has to be there. But a lot of what we see today is the deterioration of the family structure. So it's not at the highest level so that it should be at, right? The quality of life. So we want to begin with the importance of listening effectively. What the author calls in the book, Healthy Relationships, Rachel Chapman, what she says is called active listening. So she starts off with saying that the foundation of the relationship is listening effectively. She says, as she entitles it, lend me your ear. Lend me your ear. So we have to know that in our relationships, that idea has to exist. The idea of lend me your ear. So where do I stand in that regard? In terms of my partner that I'm supposed to be compatible with, that I'm supposed to incline to, that I have this relationship with, is a relationship based in iman, is a relationship based in love, is a relationship based in biological attraction, a relationship based on raising children together. It's a set of relationships overall. I'm not just in a relationship with that person, but I'm also in a relationship with other families and so on and so forth. Although the idea of family in Islam is that husband and wife, they're to govern their own relationships with each other while keeping in mind family ties or relationships that they have to the rest of their families and friends and other society and so on and so forth. And so the first thing is that we have to do self-evaluation. What kind of listener am I? Reflect upon that for a second. What kind of listener are you when you communicate in general with whoever, with friends, with parents, with strangers, with your spouse, with your soon-to-be husband or wife, with your siblings? How do you communicate? So that point of self-evaluation is very important. Do you listen most of the times effectively? Do you find yourself judging the other person? Do you find yourself distracted? I'm distracted. So that becomes part of the issue that we confront in today's time. The issue of learning how to listen. So in the flow of communication, there's either I'm talking to you, you talk to me, there's an exchange of ideas. Or you're talking to me, I'm talking to you, but we're talking over each other. I make a point, you cut me off. I say something, you misinterpret it. You understand what I'm saying? I say something, you criticize it. How is the flow of are you understanding me? Am I understanding you? How's the flow? Is most of the time you're doing the talking and I'm listening, but I never know what's on your mind. I never know how you feel. I'm scared to talk. I don't listen. I don't say anything because I'm scared to talk to you, because when I talk, you what? You disrupt me when I talk. You don't understand me when I talk. You criticize me. So in other words, the flow of communication, how communication flows, says a lot about how we feel in that relationship, whether we feel safe or not. So one of the things is that listening is a skill. And because it's a skill, it can be developed. It can be developed. If we want to have healthy families, healthy bonding with each other, we have to know that listening is important. Right? Listening implies that there's a quality interaction when it's done correctly. Now, when listening is accompanied by being empathetic, what does empathetic mean? Empathetic means that I'm putting myself in the place of the other person to understand them, to understand what they're saying, to understand what they're feeling, to understand what they're going through. You see what I'm saying? It's not about me and myself and what I think, but it's about me understanding that person, me showing that person that I care, me being there for that person. So that's a different type of relationship, right? When I'm listening with empathy, I'm giving the other person a clear idea that I'm there for them. Not, say, yeah. Uh-huh. I'm there for the person. I'm not distracted. I'm full attention. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So then the issue comes back to how is it that we achieve good listening? Sometimes we pause for a second. We give the person an indication. Not that I'm not distracted. I'm not texting. I'm not watching TV. I'm not eating, doing something else. I'm fully there in front of the person. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes energy. And I'm sending the messages. Like when I'm talking, when they're talking, I apologize. When they're talking, my face, the message that I'm not giving these types of faces. I'm not giving them a message that I have an issue with them. I'm giving them a message with my bodily language, that I'm there with them. I'm helping them to feel secure with me, even by the way that I'm looking. I'm not holding myself, what is this person saying? Like giving that type of physical signaling that I'm closed off to the person. Even how I'm directed to the person. Because sometimes if I'm like this, I'm giving the signal that I want to exit out. If I'm showing that, if I'm tapping, if I'm, showing that I'm nervous, I'm giving a signal something is wrong. I have to learn that my body communicates a message before my words, before my actions. So I have to make sure that the type of physical gestures, signals that I'm sending are that I am paying attention. Or not that, and I'm showing compassion. And I'm there with the person. That's the first thing. The other thing is that when I'm there to pause periodically to say, what did you mean by that? Can you explain that for me? Or summarizing what the person said in such a way that the person knows that you're listening in reality, not that you're just in silence. Some people will be in a conversation with you for 20, 30 minutes and then show you they were not listening, and then at the same time say, oh, I have to go. So after you finish pouring your heart out, and after you finish sharing your emotions and your intimate secrets or whatever it was that you exchanged in that moment, what you get back from that person is they were not really there. And it's worse when it's like we're talking to each other and I'm so distracted, and I use the phone as an example because it is what happens in today's time. We're so distracted for each other that there is no actual connection. So that leads to a breakdown because what? There's no empathy there. I'm not putting myself in the place of the other person. I'm not giving them attention in the full. In the past, they used to say, undivided attention. And that was something that was used a lot in school. I want your undivided attention. I want your mind to be with me. I want your heart to be with me. I want you to be there present physically. Not thinking about you have to go here, what you're going to eat, what appointment is happening, right? Because now mentally, I'm not necessarily there with you, but I'm there physically. Well, I'm just lost in my thoughts. So I'm closed into myself. That's not giving the attention. Giving the attention is that you're giving all of the energy that you have in the moment that's possible. All of your thinking, your emotion, everything to that person and showing them that you care, right? So learning how to be present in the moment is extremely important. Most of us are not present in the moment. And that's why a lot of times our communication is not healthy with each other. And many of us feel lonely because of that. So then the question becomes, what kind of communication level, the connection level, do I have with people in general? Just in general, take an inventory, pause for a second, reflect. How do I really connect with my friends? How do I connect with my siblings? How do I connect with my parents? How do I connect with myself even? Sometimes some of us, we're not even in tune with ourselves and what's going on. So empathy, putting yourself in the place of the other person, what does that do? It removes us from ourselves and it puts us in a situation where we're open to the other person. It allows us to begin to connect with one another. It removes distance from us. And it doesn't have to mean that we're talking all the time, because we're talking about listening. We're not talking about talking yet. We're talking about just listening to the other person that we're saying is our significant other, or the person that we want to marry, that we're in love with, and so on and so forth. The most that we can offer them is ourselves and our time, being there in the moment. What stops our attention? And we mentioned this, being constantly distracted limits our intention, but also our racing thinking, racing thoughts, all these ideas that come into our mind, stressed out, not being a clear mind, feelings that we have. We may be angry, we may be stressed from work, and we're saddened and this, that. All of that takes away from our ability to be there with that person that we say that we love. That's why when we go into the whole issue of being there with another person to actively listen, we have to make sure that our thinking is calm. We have to make sure that our emotions are calm. Right? We have to be able to be there and connect with the other person. That's important, especially when there's relationship breakdown or when we're getting to know each other. All right. So how are we coming in to communicate? When we're able to listen, and like I said, give feedback that the other person understands that we're listening, that what it does is it creates a bonding. Then there's the other issue, that you listen carefully. You're a good listener. You're empathetic listener. You put yourself in the place of the other person. Now, when you share, when that person shares with you certain things, certain secrets, certain ideas, certain feelings, how do you deal with what it is that they share with you? Do you keep that trust? يعني كل حلقة لها سر. Every coming together between people, it has its own secret. So there's an issue of confidence that comes into play. It's not only an issue of being an effective, active listener that's empathetic and being fully present. It's also that when people share things with you, you don't throw it in their faces later on in a fight or reveal it to destroy them. You understand what I'm saying? Or you misinterpret and misunderstand, because now you're destroying the whole process. Because when a person opens themselves up to you and is making themselves vulnerable by trusting you, and then they tell you certain things about themselves that they don't tell anyone else in the public, in the open, because you're supposed to be a person that provides safe space. We're talking about husband-wife relationship. When you can't feel safe with husband and wife, then where does that go? Because that husband-wife relationship, remember that that's also from another side, in many cases, the relationship of the mother and the father. And when that relationship is collapsed, children are growing up in the environment where they realize they can't trust, they can't share, they can't be vulnerable, they can't exchange emotion. It's more than just about ourselves. So how do you deal with the information that is shared? Once you learn how to be fully present, did you take what was shared and you violated the trust of the other person? See, because then now here we begin to understand why there's a lot of breakdown in the male-female dynamics. And one of the issues that comes up, without a doubt, males and females at times communicate different than one another. They communicate different than one another. That's why active listening is very important. Because sometimes males and females, especially when there's fights in relationships or when people don't really know each other really well, in the first few months of marriage, they're like talking above each other's heads. They're talking above each other's heads. Now, in the beginning, يعني ممكن يعني السحر موجود. Here, when we talk about sihr, we're not talking about magic like black magic and all that type of stuff. We're talking about the biological magic, the attraction between the male and the female, the energy of, yes, I want to be with you, and all of this type of stuff. You know what I'm saying? That I really like you. You know, that type of energy. Once that tones down, you understand what I'm saying? Then how is it that you're bonding with each other if it's not by way of communication? So we have to learn how to be there. So then the question comes, what kind of person am I in that communication dynamic? We talked about the issue of attention. We talked about the issue of empathy. We talked about the issue of guarding the trust, yani hifd al-amana. That's an important issue in communication. But then also we have to look at ourselves like, you know, okay, do I open up fast? Why don't I open up fast? Or why do I open up fast? We have to learn about ourselves in that dynamic. But remember, here in the first chapter, we're focusing on what? We're focusing on the issue of learning how to be effective listeners. There's another point that comes up. And the dynamics of communication overall. Is it the case that people have to communicate the same way that you communicate? See, when we learn how to listen and how to be fully present to each other, that gives space for people to be themselves. No, people don't have to talk all the time. They don't have to listen all the time. They don't have, they don't have to be in these modes all the time. But we should have some time where it's very clear that we are effectively listening to each other, so that however different we are from each other, people don't have to be the same. They don't have to do the same things. They don't have to think the same. They don't have to like the same things. But there has to be some time in our relationship when we come together, and I'm talking about with frequency, that is very clear that we know how to actively listen to each other with empathy. And what that does is that creates a safe space where we know, oh yeah, that person, they understand where I'm coming from. And there's always that feedback, right? This is as important as bonding together in intimacy, if not more important, right? And like we said, the goal is to create safe, comfortable space where there's that feeling of, I'm understood. If you don't feel understood and you don't feel cared for, and you feel isolated and lonely, part of what the author says is that the lack of communication in the sound and the healthy way that we're talking about, knowing how to actively be there for our partner in communication, when that is missing, right? When that lack of that healthy communication is missing, I want to emphasize that when that's missing, lack of healthy communication, where the other person feels safe, where they clearly understand, that you care for them, or they understand that you know where they're coming from. When that's missing is a progression of divorce. Money is not going to solve that. Physical intimacy is not going to solve that. Dua is not going to solve that. You have to put in the work. Dua can help and aid, but if you yourself are acting against the best interest of the relationship, you see what I'm saying? Then don't you think that there's consequences for that? Unless you're asking for guidance for both of you. But it just can't be a one-way street that I'm making dua that the other person loves me and this, but I'm not doing the work for that love to begin to exist. Right? That's a big issue. We have to remember that we come from different backgrounds. We come from different families, sometimes different educational levels, sometimes different levels of practicing the deen, different personalities. So it's important that we have that understanding of, okay, well, we need to learn how to bond. Even sometimes, though we come from the same culture, we still may have different types of ways that we practice the deen. We may have different economic backgrounds. We may have different levels of education, et cetera, et cetera. And it only becomes more complicated when you are from two different cultures completely. Two different cultures, two different languages, two different age ranges. That's why the issue of active listening, it allows us to begin to connect to the other person where we are fully there for that other person. And it should be mutual. Shouldn't always just be one way. That's why something that is there that is foundational, right? It's something that is there that's foundational for, our relationship. So how does this look like? How does this look like? Let's repeat a little bit. So active listening, in this case that we're talking about, when it's empathetic, it's not judgmental. This is another issue. That we're not looking while we're listening to give advice. We're not looking to necessarily comment on everything that's said. We're not looking to give a commentary or share our opinion. Get that point? In active listening with empathy, we're not looking to impose what we think and what we feel and what we perceive and what we judge. We're looking there to understand the other person, where it is that they're coming from. That's a different type of communication. When we're giving advice, when we're consulting, when we're judging, when we're sharing criticism, that's a different type of communication. When that is the dominant way that people are communicating, and they never do any active listening with empathy, be sure that that is going to contribute to the breakdown of their relationship. There's no bonding. Like I said, money is not going to bring you closer to that person. Physical intimacy is not going to bring you closer to that person. You're not even giving yourself the time to understand that person. And this is a time period where individualism is rampant. So everybody wants to be understood. They want to be heard. They want to be felt. They want to be cared for. That's the nature of the society that we live in. This is not a society where, like, for instance, maybe like if you use the example of the Japanese in the past, where it's like my duty to my family, my duty to my society overrides what I feel. And even in Japanese society, that concept of my duty to the others sometimes is becomes so problematic that when they don't feel connected, they incline towards suicide. And in this society is the opposite. When I don't feel heard, when I don't feel understood, when I don't feel connected, people begin to plunge into depression, and that also leads them to suicide. And those are extreme cases, no doubt, but it leads to depression, it leads to bad mental health, it leads to not understanding how to bond with people. And this is one of the underlying causes of divorce. So active listening, it cultivates intimacy. It cultivates trust. It cultivates understanding. It cultivates bonding. Why? Because from the beginning, it's not judgmental. It's not a war zone of who's right, who's wrong. It's neutral. It requires patience and moments of complete silence. So if you're not good with yourself, if you're not able to sit calm with yourself, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to do that for your spouse. It's going to be very difficult for you to be able to be there for another person when your mind is not there in the moment, when your feelings are not there in the moment. That's why active listening with empathy necessitates quality time. It's work, because you have to be there and let everything go so that you can be there for that person. And that's the beginning of respect, and that's the beginning of love. And that's why I said that has to be done with frequency. And see, people take marriage light, and we have some people, they like to collect spouses and all of this type of stuff. But how can you have a quality relationship, in collecting spouses like that, and you can't even focus to just listen? You see what I mean? This is why people, they end up in and out of marriage, in and out of marriage, in and out of marriage, and nothing is ever fulfilled. The human bond, the human need to be recognized and to feel connected to people, right? Outside of desire. We're talking outside of desire. We're talking about heart-to-heart communication. We're talking about spirit-to-spirit communication. We're talking about that sense of, yes, I'm understood. That person gets me. That's important so that we're able not to feel isolated and alone. Right? And so that communication requires patience. In moments of complete silence, I have to learn how to be silent. I have to learn how to tone down the chatter in my head. I have to learn how to pay attention. And see, what the author brings up is that roughly people, 20 minutes of interaction, they're gone, but because of technology, then their attention is gone after like 20 minutes or so, unless you're just skilled. You're skilled at listening. And in other cultures, they are, but in this culture, we're very highly distracted. And many times when we have anxiety and when we're addicted to social media and when we have our own internal problems and everything that goes on like that, and we can't sit still and so on and so forth, what all that does is it stops us from being able to communicate with others. That's why it's a skill. We have to develop it. We have to learn how to sit quietly. We have to learn. And it's the same thing with the spiritual life. It's very difficult to have a relationship with Allah Ta'ala outside of the basics of Salah if we can't sit still. If we can't focus in dua. If we can't concentrate in reading Quran, that shows that something else is going on within ourselves. And we have to learn how to tone down and calm down and allow our stress levels to go lower so that we can be fully in the moment. And active, empathetic communication, it involves verbal as well as non-verbal feedback. Yes, you're giving feedback, shaking your head, you're making eye-to-eye contact. Hold on a second. Can you clarify this for me? So you're asking questions for the other person to speak for themselves. You're not commenting on what they're saying. You're not criticizing what they're saying. It's about understanding what they're saying, right? Understanding what they're saying. And this is why she says it includes questions when it is appropriate. It can involve asking for clarification. It includes reflecting on what is being said. You summarize with the person. Hold on a second. Let me see if I got you right. Did you mean this? Not assuming that you have an understanding, not assuming that you know. What it doesn't look like is not showing respect or empathy for the other person. You're distracted in your own thoughts. You don't make any connections with eye contact with the other person. I know in some cultures they always show up eye contact. It varies, but here, we're using that example, at least giving some eye contact to let the other person know that you're there with them, not that you're lost in your own ideas. It doesn't mean that you only hear superficial and passing, oh yeah, like that. Or that you're interrupting, or that you're ignoring, or that when the other person is talking, it becomes a conversation about you and what you did and what you think and what you feel. Or you forget what the person is even talking about so that the person feels as though you were not listening. You rush the person, hurry up, get to your point. That is not what active listening looks like, or asking unimportant questions. We're talking about a certain set of feelings that pertain to a certain situation, and you're talking to me now about what took place a year ago or yesterday, or what you're going to do tomorrow. Has no relevance to the moment and the situation. That's not good, right? Or you pretend to pay attention, and then it's discovered that you were pretending to pay attention. In reality, you weren't, and you never asked clarification from the other person, so they express themselves. And so with that, we end on the whole concept that active listening, it is very important for us to get to know each other, to get to connect with each other, to bond, to feel safe. Without that, it becomes very difficult to see that a relationship in today's time is going to last. A relationship in today's time without any active, empathetic listening. And we said it's not about you commenting what they're saying. It's not about you giving your advice. It's about you being in the moment with that person. Without that existing in today's time, it's very difficult to see that marriage can move forward. And we say that, people, and we want to mention something that's very important. And I want to be very open, very open, because I know that some people, everybody, sometimes we're not always open. You know what I'm saying? People think that sex is going to solve their problems. That's just a reality. They feel as though sex is going to solve their desire problems. Sex is going to solve their problems of loneliness. And when it gets into that issue of desire, the issue of shahwa and this, that, and there's no connection on the heart-to-heart and emotional level, that's only going to create more and more problems. And if children come from that type of relationship, that's not a relationship of love and bonding. That's a relationship in which there's problems and fitness, so on and so forth. If we want to correct our marital relationships with one another, we have to begin by valuing the other person. And this is where we come into the issue of Sharia, حفظ العرض. نحتفظ على كرامة الناس, their honor. You understand what I'm saying? We preserve it. And so when someone is coming to me, especially when they're the person that I love, and we have so much regard for them and so much respect for them, that everything stops, and bismillah, we're with that person 100%. Or else we're just moving, to and fro. We're so busy. And that's what happens in marriages, that people become so busy that they stop listening to each other at the level that we said. Because there's other issues that come up too, is how are we communicating with each other? But we're just talking about only listening. They become so busy with everything in life that they cease to listen. And they're lost within themselves. But when active listening takes place, and you put yourself in the position of the other person, whether it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to agree with what the person is saying, but you understand where they're coming. It gives the relationship a chance. It gives you the chance to let that person communicate who they are, so that you understand them for who they say they are, how they are. You don't interpret and misinterpret. Because we have something that's called, and we definitely want to close with this, it's called waswasa, or su'adhan. We have the issue where we listen. Shaitan encourages certain ideas within us, inspires certain ideas, and then we have bad opinion. So when those things mix together and we're not listening to what the other person is saying properly, and we're interpreting, nu'awwal al-kalam, and we come up with scenarios, and we have suspicion, You understand what I'm saying? All of that creates a situation in which there's definitely going to be a disconnect, and there's definitely going to be fights, and there's definitely going to be misunderstandings, and at a certain level is going to break the relationship, at least emotionally. And you know what people say today, you ever heard the thing say that, oh, we're just roommates, we're living in the house as roommates, we're not living in the house as husband and wife, or not even friends with each other that are husbands and wife. And so we have to realize that practicing that with each other is the first step to the healthy relationship. But practicing what? The active listening, not only active that you're fully attending to the other person, but that you put yourself in the place of the other person, which is empathy. And we have to ensure that that's what's going on. And when people have problems in their marriage, there's no listening that's taking place. Most of the time, they're fighting. Another thing is, you're going to find that they're not bonding with each other physically. They're not spending time with each other. You understand what I'm saying? They're not doing things together. And that comes because, again, when the communication is off from the beginning at the root level, everything else is going to be off. And so we ask Allah Ta'ala to grant us that communication, which is healing, and to have that understanding of the other person, how they want to be understood, and that we have that patience with the ones that we love, and that we have the ability to be there for them and show them that we care and that we love them and that they're safe, and so on and so forth. And until next week, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.